What a season from Athletes Unlimited Softball. What a season over the course of the past 2 months. We have seen some incredible players continue to, make their mark in professional softball. We've seen, some incredible rookies, some incredible veterans duke it out on the diamond. And it ended up being the top two teams that we talked about a few weeks ago. The same top two teams facing off in this championship series, which ended today. And the Talons, they are the ones that hoist up that first ever AUSL championship trophy, winning in 2 games that were not decisive, very high competitive, very well contested games, yet they were marred by rainfall. Game 1 had to be postponed until 10 a.m. this morning. And then, game 2, had another hour and a half rain delays. So the rain out in Tuscaloosa and everything like that was kind of crazy, out in Alabama, And, Aaron Koffel, the MVP hitter of the year, at least the Bandits scored 1 run, in this series, 1 run, but ultimately again 3-1 in the first game, 1-0 in the second, with Sidney Romero, getting the big run in the second game, belted that one out, in the 6th inning, and Montana Fouts absolutely just had a phenomenal 6th inning, performance. And thus, Talons win a title. Other big awards: Georgina Korick won Pitcher of the Year, Hannah Flippin Defensive Player of the Year, and Anna Gold with the Rookie of the Year for their respective squads. Of course, there is the traditional Athletes Unlimited format, with 60 players competing in a individual All-Star Cup for, an individual championship from August the 2nd through the 31st. And it's going to be another 20-something game, type series over the next, over the next 30 days, which will begin this upcoming Saturday, and then go all the way until the last day in August, the 31st, which is a beautiful Sunday. To be quite honest with you, I've never been supportive of, the individual format. It just doesn't fit, it doesn't fit me personally, but, for all intents and purposes, there's more softball to be played. So, if anybody is going to be watching the AUSL All-Star Cup over the next few weeks, please do, give me something to kind of, take my mind off of things, because, it's interesting. It's an interesting concept, but I've never vibed with, the actual individual competition thing, because this is like most of the other sports that the AUSL does. It's a team sport. It's not an individual effort. That's kind of what gets me off, from, taking Athletes Unlimited too seriously. But it does give an opportunity for players to play, and the best of the best. Think of it as, again, this is an all-star cup, so think of it as an all-star competition. And we all know how I feel about all-star competitions. Yeah. So let it be known that I'm not, sticking around for that. I am going to be sticking around with softball, though. It has been a blessing to be talking about a sport that has not gotten as much coverage as it should have. And I'm grateful that, this league, exists, because there's actually a women's professional baseball league coming up in 2026, that's supposed to, do, actual baseball, 9 innings, you know, even got Little League, that Little League star from, I think it was Monet Davis, from back in the 2010s, she was out, doing things, for the Little League World Series back in the 2010s and stuff like that. And even got her, interested. And I think, softball is a little bit different from baseball. Obviously that's kind of obvious, but I do like the quirkiness in the game. It's an interesting game. It's an interesting game. I've had a pretty good time with it, watching games go by pretty quickly, games not, don't just, go like 3 hours or whatever, like back in the old days in MLB, um, and like this is my first experience with baseball or softball or any sort of diamond type sports, with 9 innings or 7 innings or however many innings you want, since 2011, I think, when I went to a Texas Rangers game back in 2011 as a part of a field trip during 4th grade. And I remember going home and watching the rest of that Texas Rangers game. And I believe it was that year that the Rangers went to the World Series and lost, that year. But it was one of the best World Series, if I remember correctly. I had to look stuff up, by the way, too, because I did not remember everything. But I do remember going back home and watching the rest of the game, and I was like, interesting, because I had to leave at like the 5th inning or something like that, 5th or 6th inning. Family decided to come get me, from the stadium and everything like that, because we lived over there. We lived in Arlington, at that time, in that area. And I was like, this is interesting, and then I was just like, at the same time, I was like, so baseball and softball have always been one of those sports that have been, kind of intriguing, but I've just never really put my mind up to it, and if softball can open up my eyes, I've always been looking up, the independent leagues and stuff like that, I always look at the independent leagues and see like, oh my gosh, this is interesting. But it's like I've never been able to commit to watching a game until this year. I was not committed. I watched, LSU win another championship, against Coastal Carolina on the men's side of things in the College World Series. And even though that game was kind of boring to me because LSU, got a big lead, it was baseball. It was America's pastime, on my laptop, which I'm going to replace, at some point, this year. It happened. I watched a baseball game. I watched a softball game. I watched multiple softball games. I watched this championship series, and I was impressed, with the quality of play. A defensive slugfest in both games with the rain. All in all, that is to say, and even, the Women's College World Series, which, go Horns, which obviously that makes a man like myself happy when the Longhorns win, a championship in anything, But this was a learning experience, and I cannot wait to talk this sport again. Come February, I'm gonna try and incorporate, softball, and try and maybe do baseball too, college baseball too, and incorporate that in. I'm gonna probably stick strictly to the AUSL. Again, the AUSL is going to cities in 2026. So I'm kind of committed to this league and this league only as far as professional softball is concerned, and obviously college softball, is there, and college baseball, I'm going to make up my mind on it at some point. It's kind of like how I've been with soccer. I've not made up my mind with soccer at all. It's just been a rough time. I've tried so much to get into it, and I can't get into it. So baseball might be the same thing. I've tried, and I don't know if I can get into it. We'll see if I can. we'll see if I can encourage me if you are a baseball fan. Keep encouraging me, and keep going out to these games because AUSL's been selling out, and stuff like that in these ballparks. I'm sure there's going to be more sellouts over the next couple weeks. So, it's going to be fun. It's going to be an intriguing time. Again, my discussion of, softball is done for 2025. So, I'm going to get on about it here, and I'll see you all on Tuesday for the final installment, basically, for the most part, of this weekend indoor football for pretty much the rest of the season. Because, again, I'm kind of easing back some things too. So that's also a thing. So I wanted to tell you that story, guys, and I wanted to tell you, what my experience was like this year. So hope you got a jolt out of this. If you didn't, oh well. Big boy out.